Hey guys, it's Courtney and I'm here with a design team project for Miss Ink stamps. Today is their release day and I'm going to be using the Just Because stamp set, and I am going to be creating a one-layer scene. So as always, I'm going to start off with my T-square ruler and a pencil just to loosely plan out my scene so I know exactly where I need to stamp my images. I know that I need to create a floor and a window, and then I'll fill in the details later once my stamping is done with a permanent pen. So I'm going to go ahead and bring out my Misty because some of these images are kind of large and this is the first time I'm stamping with them, so they don't always stamp perfect the first time. I'm going to start off by stamping out this little candelabra there, as well as one of the ravens that's going to be sitting inside the windowsill, like on the windowsill, I guess. And I was going to try to stamp this other raven out here, but I just didn't have enough room. I'm using my mini Misty here. I should have probably brought out my full-size Misty, but that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and stamp these out with Blackout ink by Ink on 3, and I am stamping onto a piece of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock. I'm going to be using this little cup as well, but I'm going to be using this twice. So one I want as if it's kind of laying on its side or tipped over, and then the other one I will put straight up. I did stamp these images twice just to get a bold black outline because, like I said, the first time you stamp photopolymer stamps, sometimes they don't always stamp perfectly. Now I did have a mask cut for this little stack of books because I was originally going to stamp this twice, but I ended up not stamping this twice, but I'm still using the mask as a guide as to where I need to stamp this second raven because I want him to be standing on top of this stack of books. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp him out, and then I'm going to arrange the stack of books underneath him. But in order to make it look as if he is standing on it, I have to kind of wipe away the ink on the corner of the top book where his little feet would be. And I prefer just to use my finger here. If you use a baby wipe or a stamp chamois, sometimes you can leave a little bit of residue or some dampness and it will carry over to your card. Not the end of the world, but I wanted to try to avoid that. And then I'll just use my ruler there and an EK Success journaling pen, which is a Copic safe pen, to just fill in the rest of that little book there that I had wiped away with my finger. I'm also going to now complete my scene, or make it a little bit more permanent here. So I'm just going to be using the pencil lines that I had originally drawn out as my guide as to where I need to place everything. So I'm starting off with that little, I guess it's a baseboard, I guess you call it, for the floor to actually make it look like the floor. And then for the window, I started just by drawing my little rectangular square around my raven. And then in order to make it look as if it is a window, I need to place a frame around it. Now you can certainly measure. I don't usually take the time to measure, I just eyeball it. So I'm just kind of creating a frame around it, as well as the windowsill itself, or the bottom part of the window where that raven would be standing. You just want to be super careful that you don't go crazy and draw right over your images. I am also going to add the top portion of the window as if the window is open, but you would still be able to see a little bit of the window, I guess. So it's kind of like one of those crisscross things. I don't know what to call them, but to make it look as if the window is still there. So once that is all drawn in, I want to create my floor. So again, I'm not measuring. I'm just kind of eyeballing it to make sure my diagonal lines are somewhat the same distance apart. And I'm going to go across the entire floor, all of it diagonal. You can change up the direction and make the center one be straight, but I just decided to keep it all diagonal, keep it nice and simple. So once all of that was drawn in, I'm going to go ahead and erase all of my pencil lines. You want to make sure you do this first before coloring, no matter what coloring medium that you're using, because once you color over it, you will not be able to erase those pencil lines. So I'm going to start off with all of the wood areas. So this will be the window frame, the baseboard, as well as the floor. I'm taking my E57 here and I'm just drawing little squiggly lines with the very tip of my marker. I'm barely touching the tip of the marker to the paper. In fact, the tip is kind of skipping as I go because I'm not adding any pressure here at all. And I'm just going in the direction of whatever object it is. So for the baseboard, I'm keeping this all the same direction, and then I'm going to kind of go at a diagonal once I reach the floor area. And I am separating each one of these boards. To be honest, you're never going to know the difference, but because these would be separate pieces of wood all pieced together for this floor, I did do these all separate. And I'm just changing the shape of each one of my little lines here, and they're pretty much just squiggly lines. That's all it really is. Keeping it nice and simple. This is actually my darkest mid-tone color, which is actually going to be my shadow color. Once I had all of these little squiggly lines down, I'm going to bring out my E59, and I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm only going to add this to my darkest areas. So you kind of have to know where your shading is going to be. My only light source in this card is going to be that candelabra. So I'm going to concentrate everything around there being a little bit lighter, and my shadows and things like that. The back part of the floor, the part that's furthest away from us, would also be the darkest, and then there's also going to be a shadow underneath each one of these objects. So I'm just adding some of those squiggly lines with that E59. Gonna bring back out my E57, and this is where I'm going to go ahead and add my shadows and my shading. So I'm gonna add a little bit of shading off to the top left hand side of that windowsill, furthest away from that candelabra. Also to the left hand side of each one of these objects, because that light source would be coming from the right. Adding a shadow underneath each one of these objects that are on the floor, so they're not just floating there. And then starting from the floor, I'm going to basically just draw a line along where the floor meets the baseboard, and then kind of flick away from that. When you're looking at one single object, the further away that object gets, the darker it'll be. So next I'm going to bring in the E55, and I'm going to go ahead and extend all of these areas out, and just extending them closer to the right hand side, but I'm preserving pretty large highlight for most of this area here. For the floor, I'm just going to flick these areas out and also extend the shadows out under each one of those objects there. I'm not being overly careful with my coloring because I know I have to color everything else afterwards. Most of the time, as long as you're using the same or darker color to color over it, you don't have to worry about it. You can basically use any Copic marker as a colorless blender as long as you're coloring over it. That's going to pretty much take away the color of all of these areas that I went out of the lines. And there are a lot of areas that I went out of the lines, but that's okay. It will cover it up. So once I had the floor complete, we're going to move on to the wall, and I'm going to bring out some E70 markers. And I'm going to start by saturating the paper in my darkest areas because the colors that I have for the E70s are kind of far apart. So I jumped from a 79, I think it is, to a 74. So they're not going to blend perfectly. So I want to make sure that the paper is nice and saturated to make these colors blend a little bit easier. I'm going to add most of the darker areas off to the left-hand side of the card, and over on the other side of the window, I'm just going to add a little bit of that dark color to the very top of the wall. And I am using a flicking motion a little bit towards the end where my other color will meet, just to make my blending a little bit easier, because like I said, it is a huge jump from the 79 to the 74. Going to go ahead and extend those areas out a little bit further. I'm moving over towards the right hand side at this point, and over on the other side of the window, I'm just bringing that down a little bit further. You may have to go over some of these areas a little more than once if you are jumping from like a 79 to a 74 like I am. They are not going to blend perfectly, but the more you go over it, the better results that you'll have. Once I had that done, I'm going to move on to the E72, and I'm just extending these areas out a little bit further. And then I'll finish off with the E70 just for basically just behind the candelabra. That's going to be the very lightest color, or the very lightest area, I should say. I also wanted to add a little bit of a shadow next to the window, so the window frame would stick out a little bit. So I'm going to bring back out that E79, and I'm just going to draw a straight line right along the left hand side of that, and then blend that out with the E74. It's not really that noticeable because this area is the darkest area anyway, but I felt the need to add it. So next we're going to move on to the sky through the window. So I've just used my bottle of Nuvo drops there to trace the bottom, just using the E40. You can use really any color for this to create my circle. This will be my moon. Then I'm going to bring out my I'm bringing out my B90 markers, and I'm starting with the B91, and I'm just going to outline my moon and bring that out a little bit further, just so that I can keep that highlight area. Then I'm going to bring in that B99, which is the darkest, and the furthest away from the moon it is, the darkest it'll be. So I'm going to fill in this bottom right hand corner completely with that B99. I'm using 5 colors here, but these blend beautifully. I definitely recommend, if you don't have the B90 markers, that might have to be your next investment, because these are my favorite blue combination. It's great for like denim, night skies, everything, and they just blend beautifully together. So here in a second, we are going to have a little bit of an interruption. Those of you who have watched my channel for a while have seen this face or back or tail before. This is Frankie. He has not been in a video in a very long time, so he decided he would like to make an appearance. He sat here for a good 15 minutes before I decided that I'm gonna move everything over so that I can continue to color. I will lose focus a little bit here and there because he has to see everything that I'm doing and check out every marker that I pick up. So next I'm bringing out the B97 marker, and I'm just going to extend those areas out a little bit further. Like I said, these really blend nicely together, so you won't really have much of a problem going right in with that darkest color. And I'm kind of keeping the shape of the moon. So that's why I started with that B91. So I'm reserving that highlight color, but it will also allow me to kind of keep that round shape. Bringing in that B95 and just extending those areas out a little bit further. Again, trying to keep that round shape that I have going on there. Then the B93, extending those areas out even further. And then finally, I will bring back in that B91 and just fill in that highlight area and kind of blend out those areas that needed to be blended out. Not that you can see because of his little face being in the way. So after sitting here for another 15 minutes, he decided to get down and go check out what's going on outside through the window so I can finish my coloring without any more interruptions. So next we're going to go ahead and move on to the coloring of the ravens themselves. I'm going to be using some C markers here, starting directly with my darkest color, which is the C7. It's a pretty dark gray. Being ravens are black, we're still going to have some highlights, but I wanted to make them fairly dark, but not quite dark enough where it's going to blend in with the rest of my scene. So I'm just going to be using the C7, C5, and the C3 will be my lightest color. These illustrations are perfect for coloring because they basically tell you exactly where your shading needs to be. Underneath his wing is going to cast a shadow. I'm using some flicking motions on his little belly area where there are flick lines already, just to make him look a little bit furry, or not furry, I guess you'd say feathery. And I'm just using that flicking or feathering motion to get that kind of texture within his body. The ravens also have their legs and feet, as well as their beaks are also black. So I'm going to be using the same combination for those as well, doing very little shading on their little feet there. You can see that I'm missing part of that stamped image, so I kind of drew that in myself. Just because these are such tiny areas, you don't really need to do much shading. I'm also using the lines within the image for these little feathers on his wing and on his tail, and I'm just again using that little feathering motion there just to kind of keep some texture there. I prefer to start off with my darkest color whenever I want to keep that texture. So when I color hair or an animal that I want to make look furry, I will start with my darkest color, because I find that when you do that, you kind of keep those flick lines or those feathering lines a little bit easier. They don't blend out, and that will give your image or give your animal, or in this case our bird, a little bit more texture. So I'm just finishing up with the C3 for the highlight for these birds. Then I am going to go ahead and move on to the candelabra. And while I have my C markers out, I am going to use those for the candelabra as well as these little cups here. So for the candelabra, I am going to go ahead and start with my C5. This will be in certain areas around object. So I want to make sure that I'm preserving a center highlight, especially for this main part right here, or the middle part, I guess. And then for the bottom, it would be in the center, but there's going to be more shading behind it, if that makes any sense. So I'm just extending those areas out a little bit further with the C3, and then I'll finish off with the C1, and I'm going to cover up the entire, all the white space. Now I'm going to use the same color combination. However, I'm going to leave a little bit of white space. I want my cups to appear white. So I'm using that C5 very, very sparingly on either side of these little cups, extending those areas out a teeny tiny bit with that C3 and then the C1, but I'm leaving that center completely white. And this will make the object still look white while still having shadows. So anytime you're coloring anything that is white or that you want to appear white, keep in mind that every white object is still going to have shadows to it. So you want to make sure that you're using some gray markers to add those shadows. Same thing for this cup. However, I'm bringing the flick lines from the bottom portion, or the part that's laying against the floor, up a little bit further, because the light would be catching more of the top part of the cup rather than the bottom. So next for the books, I am just going to be taking a variety of different brownish markers here, and I'm going to go right in with my darkest color, because quite honestly these areas are not very large. The bindings of the books would be more round, so I'm going to preserve a center highlight for the binding of the books. I guess that's what you'd call it, right? The end of the book or whatever. And for the cover itself, you can't really see too much of it, so I'm just going to go in with my mid-tone color for that. So I'm going to go with my darkest color on either side of that binding, blend that out with the two mid-tones, and then leave a little bit of a highlight area for just the center. Some of these books have like those stripes looking things on them, and I'm going to be coloring those kind of like a goldish color, so I'm not coloring directly over those yet. For the book that the raven is standing on, I'm just going to concentrate my darkest color being towards the back of the book, because again, that would be furthest away from us. But I also want to add a shadow underneath his little feet, so he would also be casting a shadow on that book as well. So here I am going in with the E18 as my darkest, the E15, E13, then the E11, but I'm going to keep out that E15 color, because I'd like to use that as my darkest color whenever I'm coloring anything gold. And those little stripes on the books, I'm going to be coloring gold, but keeping that center highlight too. So I'm going to use that E15 and just add a teeny tiny bit on the top and bottom of each one of those little stripes. Then I'm going to bring out my Y markers, so the Y28 and the Y26, and that will make it look as if it is kind of gold. So once that was done, we're going to go ahead and bring in some reds. I felt like everything was super, super dark here, so I wanted to bring a little bit of red, and I always like red in like spooky scenes like this. So for the candles, I am going right in with my darkest color. Because I have everything already colored, I'm too nervous to oversaturate my paper. Reds tend to bleed a little bit more than any other color combination, and they are the most difficult to take up. So these candles are a round object, so I am keeping a center highlight, but I'm also creating a shadow where the wax is kind of dripping down on the rest of the candle. While I have these colors out, I'm going to also color this little bookmark that's sticking out of one of these books. Again, just keeping the shadows off to the left-hand side and just extending that a little bit and keeping that highlight off to the right. For the flames of the candles, I'm going to be using a R marker, a YR marker, and a Y marker. Just want to make sure that the last number of each of these markers is the same, or maybe one, possibly two off, and you should have no trouble blending those. Last, I'm going to add a few white gel pen details to their eyes. I'm going to bring back their eyes, being I color directly over them. Also adding a few highlights to the candles as well as these little cups, and I felt like it needed something, so I'm going to draw in some spider webs in the corner. These are super easy to draw in. It's just basically straight lines and then like curves, or yeah, I guess curvy lines, just to meet the straight lines. And I'm going to draw a larger one in that corner, and I didn't have a whole lot of room to draw one in here, but I felt like it needed something in this corner, so I am going to draw in a smaller spider web over on this corner. So once all of my coloring was done, the last thing we need is the sentiment, and I love the sentiments by Miss Ink. They have the best sentiments for their stamp sets, and this is perfect. I didn't leave myself a whole lot of room, so I'm going to go ahead and stamp this on my little floor of my scene here with VersaFine Onyx Black ink. And that is it. That is the card. I will go ahead and leave all of the supplies listed below, as well as a link to the Miss Ink shop so that you guys can check out the new release. Thank you guys so much for stopping by, and have a great day. Bye.